Hello, Americans. I'm Kent McNall. It's Constitution time. Today is November 9th, 2020. And we've had an experience that should have gone something like this. We had an election. We had a period of tense waiting. We have a winner. We have a loser. We have an acceptance speech. And we should have had a concession. But some of that hasn't happened yet. And we're off on another adventure. Hopefully one that won't take too long or last too long as we go through the final throes of the last 4 years. But it could be a rough road ahead. And so that's some of what we're going to talk about this evening. I'm very happy to have a friend of the show, Mr. Stephen Steck, joining us. And without too much more ado, I'm going to go right over to Stephen. Take just a moment to switch over. Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening, Ken.
I hope today finds you well.
Yeah, can't complain too much.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For our audience, I'm very hopeful that we have solved our big audio problems, but we are on Zoom for this part of the show, and we will have some normal Zoom audio issues, I'm sure. But thank you for joining us, and thank you for being patient. So, Stephen, we're in an interesting situation. It looked for a short time this weekend like it might not get too interesting, but that was short. What's your assessment of where we're at right now?
I mean, where we're at right now basically is we've got two candidates who both believe that they have won the election and are moving forward with that belief.
So I would say that pretty universally, it's accepted that one of the candidates who has over 4 million more votes and a clear electoral edge has a pretty solid claim. And the other candidate has some unfounded accusations and not such a great claim. And this is a bit of a constitutional crisis and could develop into a worse one. And I think is one of those situations that we've talked about many times on the show that simply was not anticipated by the founders. It was not anticipated, really, that we would willingly elect someone who would take some of these actions. And so, as we have been on some other issues that I've talked about in the last few weeks, we're a little bit cast adrift. And the Constitution can't directly help us right now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, the Constitution lays out some rules about things, but it's not extremely in-depth. And then we've got some laws as well, but we're a little bit in uncharted territory.
So you mentioned some of the laws. I know Presidential Transition Act is out there.
Mm-hmm.
How specific does that get, to your knowledge?
I'm no expert, but to my knowledge, it's pretty vague about specific timelines. Some timelines, it's very specific about like, a transition team has to be defined by June of the election year, but for other, it's more vague.
So the person responsible at the GSA made a call today to not financially support the incoming president-elect.
Mhm.
Was that a political decision? Is that a uh, a normal thing that would happen?
It's definitely not normal for the head of the GSA to make that kind of call. Um, there have been other calls that have been called into question that Emily's made, but this is definitely one of them. That releasing I think it's about $9.8 million for the Biden campaign's transition team to hire all the people they need and office space.
So that they could get offices and do the vetting of the people they're planning to bring in, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting waters we'll get into if partisan bureaucracy starts to step in on some of these things. And I imagine it could go the other way as well. But, another aspect of everything that's happening is the exposure of the country. If we're going to have some more revenge firings, other actions that are taken on the way out the door, possibility of very little governing going on for a significant period of time. And that leaves us vulnerable. I mean, we're certainly exposed as a nation if that's what's going to be happening. Again, I'm not sure what constitutional protections step in if that kind of thing starts to go on.
I mean, the only protections really are the once the electoral college is voted, things are kind of set in motion, and it's reasonably hard. Other than with Grant and Hayes, it's reasonably hard for things to change unless Congress decides to reject the electoral vote, which would be a whole nother mess that we probably don't want to get into.
I assume the whole of Congress would have to do that. Hopefully not just the Senate or not just the House of Representatives.
I believe so. Yes.
So other things have been interesting to observe. For, again, a short period of time over the weekend, the media seemed somewhat calmer, somewhat less partisan in calling for the norms of transition, like an actual concession, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But now seems to be swinging back the other day. And I didn't spend the whole day watching or anything like that, but tuned into the usual key partisan stations enough to know that the rhetoric is changing again.
Yep.
Also easy to see that at least one party's representatives, senators, are not speaking up as they should. The usual 3 or 4 faces in the Senate, for example, are speaking out, but very few others. So they're still under the thumb of the executive.
Yep.
Does that jibe with your observations?
Yeah, I mean, they still seem to be willing to back what most media outlets and most people are assuming is the outgoing president, which is an interesting choice on their behalf, but one they do seem to be making.
There have been a couple of other themes that I've noticed in the reporting and that kind of thing. One is a certain level of support for absolutely unfounded claims in both Republican-led and Democrat-led states that there's been some systematic voter fraud. That it's a kind of claim you just can't make with no evidence, no even anecdotal information. Literally, the anecdotes are one dead lady over here who somehow had a vote cast that was going to be for the outgoing executive, by the way, and another one over here. And how does that add up to 4 million or even the 50,000 or even 10,000 votes that might be needed in some places to overturn anything? Is this just delay? Is it just distraction?
I think it's a little bit of delay and distraction, but I really think it's an attempt at pretty much anything, because as the current administration, the outgoing administration sees it, what do they have to lose by trying whatever they can to stay in power?
Well, our democracy, I think, is one of the things that we all have to lose if that goes on and we allow it to go on.
Mm-hmm.
There is no power of oversight that's going to help us here. I mean, the power of oversight is already severely kneecapped, but who can do anything if this situation really gets egregious? If the people around the executive won't do anything, if the most powerful politicians of the executive's party won't do anything, what is the remedy?
It'll come down to if the federal judges are willing to do what they've sworn to do and uphold the Constitution and the laws.
So the courts.
Yep.
Courts take a long time.
That they do.
Could this be delayed all the way to January 20th?
I don't think so. At this point, I mean, even in 2000, we saw the decision made December 12th. I think that come the electoral election day, December 14th, we'll know the answer, one way or another.
So I think it can still be hoped for, and I very much hope for it, that cooler heads will prevail, tempers will cool, family members will talk to each other and to the executive, and that this can still go the way that it should go. But it's another norm busted. It's another example where the traditions, precedents, norms, courtesies that have always gotten us through simple things like the transfer of power are not. So do we have to strengthen the norms around the transfer of power? Do we have to do an amendment to the Constitution to stipulate that the outgoing executive must, on pain of removal, early removal, fully support the transition? I mean, would that be an overreaction?
It certainly would be challenging to get an constitutional amendment, but I could certainly see us after, depending on how this plays out. I mean, I would say that as long as things work themselves out by early December, it probably doesn't hinder the transition too much, because the Biden team is able to start work on some of the things even without the funding. So they're working with the FBI and that kind of thing. But if things are still messy early December, I certainly could see a pretty strong argument for strengthening the 63 Transition Act.
Well, I'm going to look into that act more for my own edification. To your knowledge, is anything that's happened so far even in violation of that act?
I don't think we're quite yet in violation. The reasoning given by the GSA as to why the funding hasn't been released is that there's been no certifications, no official certifications that that the Biden team has won the election, and she's not wanting to go by what the media is saying, even if that's been the kind of norms in the past. But because that's not written in stone as to which decision the GSA has to go by, I don't think there's any laws that have been broken for transition yet. If things continue to progress, there might be, though.
That is a theme that's many people are repeating, is why does the media get to make the call? I know of no official certifications other than the electors. Is there some government guy with a rubber stamp somewhere that's isn't stamping?
I mean, each state has their certification deadlines that they'll certify by. Most of them fall around the end of this month, anywhere from I think the earliest is around the 20th, all the way through to I think the latest is about January 2nd or 3rd, or December 2nd or 3rd, not January. But other than that, there's no. There's just the Electoral
federal.
College. Yeah, there's no federal.
Well, these certifications are happening in the normal timeline. I don't think those happen the day after the election. They take a long time. So the GSA can't put their flag in that ground to say we're waiting for those certifications.
Yeah, and they have in the past released funds to both parties. In 2004, they released funds to both parties, and again in 2008. Now it was more limited funds; it wasn't the full amount, but they have in the past released funds to both parties.
By the way, I want to take a second and encourage any viewers who are on the live stream. If you want to put in a chat question, I will pick up my iPad and look at it. So please put one in if you like. I've made that commitment before and not made good on it, so people don't put as many questions in. So what other aspects of this, Stephen, do you see? What's your level of confidence that this ship will right itself and we won't have some of the more dire? Now, of course, the executives has started some firings, and as I mentioned before, that could get messy. And clearly, the intention can't be to replace those folks for 2 months. Wouldn't think. But are there other things that, like I said, what's your level of confidence?
I'm pretty confident that things will work themselves out. I mean, at this point, it's pretty clear that what the election results are, and even I don't think that anyone wants to majorly disenfranchise 75 million plus. I'm guessing a large portion, well over half of even those who voted on the tickets that hadn't won, they don't want to see results overturned because maybe in 4, 8, 6, however many years that could get used against them. So most people want democracy to work the way it's meant to. So I really think that the senators and the judicial will all come to the right decision.
There are also 2 very important runoff races in Georgia, even though both of the Georgia Republican candidates are on the voter fraud bandwagon. But there could be some political blowback to those races if they go much further down this path. And I don't think that the Senate wants that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that McConnell will pursue this path for a while, but he's going to be very determined to hold the Senate because the last thing he wants to see is a single party having the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
Which is what would happen if both of those seats were won by the Democrats.
Yep.
So much at stake for everyone here, but most importantly, for the people of the United States with their democracy and their Constitution.
Yeah.
Any other things that you've noted, Stephen, in the goings on?
Not too many. It definitely has been a little disappointing how many people are calling for various Secretary of States to resign when they've done, I think, as good a job as can be expected, given the challenging circumstances.
I actually, and I'm not just saying this because of the result that we've had, but it just seems to me, as I mentioned in a previous show, that the states and the election boards and the workers and the secretaries of state, the governors, have all been a cool hand on the tiller throughout this process. And whatever the noise was, they've been very steadfast in saying, we're counting every vote. We're chasing down every report of any kind of wrongdoing. And they continue to do that. And almost, most of the suits that have been filed, many of them have already been thrown out with extreme prejudice. So I tip my hat to those folks. I think they're hardworking Americans that did their duty well. And perhaps in one of the states, maybe two of the states, there will be something more than 5 or 10 cases of some kind of voter fraud, but it can't make up the ground. So I'm also keeping my eye on the distraction factor, because an awful lot of hurricanes in the media initiated by the administration, I think, have been for administration, to make noise, cover fire for other things that are going on. And there's going to be a lot going on in the next 2 months. So, well, Stephen, I would like to thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll be on again soon. In fact, I happen to know that you will, but really appreciate your time. And appreciate your time. Yep, you bet. Appreciate the time of the folks watching. Be well, Americans. Take care of yourself. We will get through this together, and we have a lot of work to do after we do. Take care.